Whoa, 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 whoa. Stop that mix, rock stars. iZotope, Native Instruments, and Plugin Alliance are running the Summer of Sound sale right now until July 6th. And I'm going to show you how to save even more and get a better deal than anybody else, so keep listening. We're talking 50% off products, updates, and upgrades, plus special hardware and software bundle deals. Right now, Native Instruments is offering 50% off all complete 14 bundles, as well as all individual instruments, effects, expansions, and upgrades. So don't miss their unbeatable hardware and software bundles, including machine and complete control keyboards. Over at Plugin Alliance, you can get more than 160 special deals on the greatest plugins, with some as low as $7.99. Just a few of my new mixing favorites are Black Box Analog Design, Townhouse Bus Compressor, AMEC 9099 console, and Metric AB for referencing my mixes. Plus, there's tons of killer free plugins just to get you started. And finally, at iZotope, you can get classic tools like RX, Ozone, and Neutron for 50% off. Plus, here's a secret for you. Use the code ROCK10 when you check out for an additional 10% off. So that gets you a lower price than anybody else. Plus, they're giving away their incredible Audio Lens plugin right now to help you dial in the perfect mix EQ curve. Just go to iZotope.com/rockstars and get ready to rock this summer. This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, iZotope, Atom Audio, JZ Microphones, and Spectra 1964. You're hearing my voice right now on the JZ V12 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX100D mic pre and C610 complementer with iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please remember to check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
There's a lot of music being made, and there's a lot of people that are just sort of unsure of how to finish it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that just need someone that's going to be like an ally and a helpful listener. I think that's just the biggest thing I can leave with. Be on their side and be patient. Sometimes things take longer than you expect, sometimes not. It's all totally fine. You're going to walk away happy, and it's all going to be good.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. My recording studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved and sped up my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go check out the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Psst. Hey Rockstars, over here. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of Recording Studio Rockstars. My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, D-click, D-clip, DS, D-plosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 and get 10% off any plug-in purchase from iZotope. You can tell your friends, but, be cool about it. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Bryan Cook, a Los Angeles-based mixer whose credits include U2, One Republic, the Raconteurs, Fleet Foxes, Iggy Pop, Queens of the Stone Age, Cold War Kids, Damien Rice, the Eels, and Autolu, to name just a few. He's been a previous guest on the podcast for episode RSR408, where we talked about his beginning at Berklee School of Music, working at A&amp Studios, mixing with composer Michael Andrews, and his recent work on Jeff Goldblum's latest album. Today, we're going to dive back into talking about mixing and Bryan's thought process and workflow in the studio to bring his experience to your home studio rock stars and help simplify what can seem like a very complex process sometimes. So very excited to have him back to the show. Please welcome back Bryan Cook to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bryan, are you ready to rock yet again, brother?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Glad to have you back, man. Nice to see you. Yeah, one of the things as I was getting ready for this and I was like just kind of poking around and looking at your studio again and your website, is I was reminded that you're right there in LA, but then you have this great picture on your site that shows solar panels on the roof. And I don't remember if we talked about that last time. Tell us about your solar powered mixing studio there and where you're joining us from.
Eagle Rock, great little homey community of Los Angeles. It's, you know, your neighbors, everyone looks out for each other. Really creative community. Love it. Solar panels just came about. I realized that we could, you know, get them at a pretty good rate. It was a finance, but it was the same as what we're paying DWP. And after 12 years, we'll own them outright with no bill. So it just kind of made a lot of sense. We're still connected to the grid for nighttime and cloudy days.
Right.
I don't have battery storage. So it's just sort of like we buy and sell about the same amount. So it's actually just so that there's something called a solar bank that you accumulate extra. So we wind up with a little bit of extra energy and money in our solar bank, but we can't cash out of the solar bank. It stays at DWP. So.
It's not like there's a drive-through ATM at the solar bank.
No, I wish they'd send me a check, but no. But it's pretty even between what we buy and sell and what we use at night and on cloudy days. So
that's fascinating. So solar panels can give you power. It can go back to and then, you know, when you need it, you pull it from the electric company and you can get batteries and kind of charge up at home if you wanted to. Are there other things about solar studios that you've either experienced or learned about? Like, can you have a cleaner power and less noise in a recording or any of that kind of stuff?
That's outside my outside of my purview or my scope. I don't really
all right, dig it.
go that deep on it. But this just was a fun way. I mean, I'm really generally very concerned about you know, leaving behind a future for our kids. So
yeah,
it's something that I'm passionate about in general. So this was good for me, good for us.
I've gotten a little electrified over here. I got a electric car and it's charging out in the driveway, and
nice.
It's the best reference stereo I've ever had on wheels before. So that part's fun.
Cool. Every new car is always an adjustment. And now we have two cars. We have a Highlander and a Prius, and they're just so different. But
yeah.
Both really useful. I still do the car check. I like the car check.
I do it like crazy. You know, one of the things that occurs to me as part of the car listening experience is that there are, you know, rumblings that the car makes that sort of integrate with the bass of your mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's probably a little different in an electric car than in, you know, an old classic V8 or something like that.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, so tell us a little bit more about your studio. You know, you probably talked about it a little bit last time, but we always love hearing it and getting a good image in our heads. What are you surrounded by, and what is your studio setup where you are right now?
I use Pro Tools HDX with a Macintosh. I have Apogee converters, Dyne Audio speakers. For the longest time, I was using the Fulcrum summing mixer with some makeup gain afterwards. Lately, I've been doing a lot more in the box and trying to figure out if there's a tangible difference, and I don't think there is for me. I don't really think about the stuff too much. As long as I'm getting like a good visceral response from what I'm doing, I try not to over analyze it too much.
Yeah, yeah. So
But
you're
yes,
referring to keeping it all in the computer versus breaking it out through analog
correct.
summing?
Correct. Yeah. Right. That stuff, I mean, it matters, but it doesn't. For me, I'm like focused on the music, and the recall is nice. I've been doing the Shep stem printing thing. So the in the box stuff is pretty cool because I can stem a whole record. You know, it can open and close different sessions for me. But
Right, that's the
sonically,
whole sound flow feature
yeah,
that Andrew
correct.
Shep's created.
Yeah. That's been great. A lot more stem printing going on these days, but
Yeah, especially in your world when you're doing stuff for film and label delivery and all that, right?
yeah. And even like independent artists are making tracks for their tours. So it's pretty common.
Making tracks for their Taurus? Boy, that's getting old school. Sorry, I'm kidding. Just bringing back the car reference. For tours, rock stars.
Was that a little Canadian accent I detected there?
No. If it was accidental.
But yeah, I mean, it's Pro Tools mixing, and it's at home, and I have a couple different speaker setups and a little bit of analog gear. I have a retro stay level, Dramastic Obsidian stereo bus compressor, NTI,
Right.
NTI EQ. I use those if I'm doing the summing mixer. If I'm in the box, I probably won't use those. But I used a lot of the Memory Man guitar pedal. I love how that distorts and feeds back. I have a EMT 140 that makes its way onto probably almost every mix. I do love the EMT plugins, but that real one's really pretty great. So,
Yeah.
the real EMT, I usually use it on a lead vocal and kind of drive the input to it to get the right density, and then I usually print that EMT, the real one, side by side with my lead vocal and group them and ride them together. If there's more rides after I print the plate, so. But the lead vocal doesn't always get the EMT, so it's just sort of whatever, whatever works for the song.
So you were saying that you like to drive the input level of the analog plate?
Well, not drive in the sense of distorting it, but just figuring out, sending into it, it kind of changes like the density of it a little bit. Like you can send less into it. It's a little bit of a lighter sound, and it gets a little more dense when I send more into it. Then I just bring the return down. So for lead vocals in particular, I like that, and the analog feature of that sort of real interaction of the voltage,
Yeah, that's a good reminder that affects sends and returns. It's not always, the send is not always equal to the return on stuff. In some cases, maybe it is. Probably in a digital delay, it's a little more equal, but on an analog piece of gear or gear that has a tonality to it, it can really change it.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that stuff too. Like if you're in the middle of the mix and you're just sort of in the musical zone and you're trying to change the send to an effect, but you kind of half forgot that you sort of saturated or distorted the return. Yeah, if you can easily forget that something is saturated on the return, and then that can, when you're sending more or less to it, you're not getting the same sort of response that you might expect. Because if the return is saturated up against a wall, you're sending more or less in, you're not getting that same amount of reflection that you hoped. You might be sending more and you're not getting more because the return is clamped down. So
right.
That's just sort of a signal flow issue that you as a mixer have to try to remember. And
yeah, that's sort of like a classic mix compression and limiting challenge too, right?
Right. And it just presents challenges of like pre or post fader sends and groups, and just try to keep things responding the way you want.
Yeah. One of the tricks that I've learned about and started adopting is actually to intentionally screw with the return of an effect. I mean, I think for me, the first time I started discovering it was like, oh, you take a delay or a reverb, particularly a reverb. Maybe I was trying to figure out how to get, that kind of an explosive snare reverb or something. And then I would put the Bomb Factory 1176 plug-in after it. And I was like, wow, that really makes the reverb leap out a little bit more,
Right.
And then more recently, it was sort of learning that something like the Devil Lock, put that after reverb, and it's like, whoa, that really makes it,
Right.
speak out of a track.
Yeah, and at that point, it just becomes more of a specialized effect that is more associated with one element. A lot of my returns I keep on the left side of the session and the beginnings, the session away from the tracks. And I consider those sort of shared elements that are common spaces that tie things together. So, for example, like if I'm like let's say the UAD Ocean Way room, for example, like I like that on acoustic guitars, sort of pan to the opposite side of the acoustic, but that could doing that, then if you're looking for a vocal space, it could be cool to like have a pre-delay thing and then have the vocal pre-delay going to that same acoustic guitar space. Or if like the drum rooms that were recorded maybe aren't as roomy as you'd like them to be, like take the room, send that to the room. But yeah, I think of effects in two ways. Like one is just kind of global common friends that just sort of are for the whole track. But then what you're talking about is like mangling a return. It kind of becomes part of one of the channels in a way. It kind of becomes part of one of those sounds.
Right.
And it's harder for it to be shared with other elements in the track.
Yeah. So how often do you find, what are some things that are more likely to be shareable between the different elements of a mix versus things where you're like, okay, these are effects just for the drums, these are effects just for the guitars or just for the vocals?
I don't really have a lot of like effects that gets put specifically on an element. Most of my stuff is shared. If it's like an effect, on an element, I usually use it as an insert. Maybe there's a wet dry knob on it, but I mean, all my reverbs and delays are usually shared. I would say are global or shared.
It feels like a classic way to set up a mixing desk, where you've got effects over to the right. Did you say you like to have your effects on the left? Did I hear you say that?
Yeah, and it's a really funny. I learned this thing through Universal Audio that they load their chips from left to right in the session, or top to bottom in the edit window, or left to right in the mix window. So someone at Universal Audio once told me, said like, hey, if you have a really heavy UAD plug like Ocean Way or 480 or Capital Chambers or something, put them to the left in your session on your mix window, and then it'll load that first on the chip. So like if you have 8 chips, take the first three chips and load them first with those big plugins. It's just a better use of if you can fit more plugins on a chip if you load the big ones first. So
nice. That reminds me of like the Mix Plus systems in Pro Tools where you're trying to like load up all your processor cards just right.
Yeah. But it turns out that that's an okay way for me to think. Because my subgroups and master bus are on the right, and the print track is on the right, and then the effects return stuff is on the left, and then all the tracks that I'm focusing on are in the middle. So it works fine for me.
A&amp Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the new A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the A&amp Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at adampaudio.com. The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia, featuring the patented Golden Drop capsule design for enhanced clarity that will give your recordings the classic vintage tone. Our friends at JZ Microphones have also come up with a special offer only available to Recording Studio Rockstars listeners. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the V67, V47, or V12 microphones. And to make this deal even better, they'll throw in a free shock mount worth $120 for a limited time at jzmic.com. We were talking before this, you and I, about really focusing on mixing techniques and stuff like that. So there's a lot of usable stuff for the rock stars.
Totally.
So if we continue on effects for a moment,
Yep.
When do you find you're more likely to change or automate a send to an effect? And when do you find you're likely to grab the return fader of an effect and just ride that up and down?
It's almost always sends for me. I very, very rarely automate returns.
Okay.
The exception might be if it's like a really long thing and I need to really dry up a stop. If there's a break in the song and I might need to really just be super hardcore about the drop being bone dry, I might automate a return in that case. But 99% of the time it sends. And it's about being conscious of like the chords you're creating, like as things are sustaining and as the source is walking up or down a step or whatever the intervals are of the source, you are creating chords because you're extending those tones. So it's a musical situation to sort of be like, okay, these notes are ringing in a good way, and then that as it's walking down, maybe the third or the fourth or the second doesn't really work. So let's be sending on the roots and the fifths and whatever suspension, whatever notes you want to elongate. But it's just that you have to keep in mind that later there's going to be a new note coming, and how does the reverb of the old note interact with the new walk down note that just changed? So there's a lot of send automation happening for me over here.
That reminds me of being a guitar player and using delays, and you start discovering that like a delay can sound really cool with a guitar part because it's almost like you're creating a round or you're creating harmonies against itself. But then sometimes you hit a certain note movement and you're like, oop, that doesn't, that rubs when hearing that other note still in there.
But the shared delays are, it's a really great way to tie things together. Like if a guitar and a piano are doing similar parts, you can maybe have delays that are shared but panned opposite. But those common spaces are triggering you that they're working together as a unit, even if they're not the same type of instrument. I do a lot of trying to think about like, where are all the parts and where are the unisons, where are the harmonies? And that could be across a family line. That could be, people are always harmonizing and octaving and doubling on different instruments. So I think that's a big part for me, is understanding on like, where are the elements, and they don't necessarily have to be all on guitar or all on keys or all on strings or all on horns or all on anything. You got to know where all the little matching nuggets are. It's like a flipping over cards in a memory game or something, you know?
Yeah. I want to go back and just reiterate something you said. So Rockstars, when Bryan was talking about drying up, something needing to be bone dry, if I understand you correctly, that means in those times where like, the chorus is coming along and you got all this reverb and everything, and then all of a sudden it just goes to this drop out, like where the band drops out and it gets quiet for a second, or something happens suddenly, the reverb that's sustaining could be kind of overly massive in that moment. So those can be times where, and if you were to turn down the send at that point, it's like, oh, it's too late. It's already in the reverb and it's extending.
Still going, yeah.
So that's the time to grab that return fader and just zip it down real quick, or bring it down to a lower level, or even, just the opened up spaces in a song and in a production and arrangement. All those effects really stick out so much more than they do in the chorus. It's remarkable what a huge difference there can be in what's an appropriate level between two sections like that.
Yeah. It's very common to ride the send quite a bit. Like if you set your chorus level vocal reverb, it's almost always going to be too much in the verse or the more sparse areas. So you're going to have to knock down that send quite a bit. I don't know, 60 B or 90 B or something. It varies. You got to just feel it out. But
I don't know how often you have somebody sort of sitting and listening while you're mixing these days, but certainly that has been a part of our experience. And I think about the times where somebody's mixing a track, and then I've heard this story like shared back to me from somebody else before, a producer, where like he said every time he pressed stop on the track, it was like, oh my God, there's so many effects on the vocal or whatever, because he didn't, because all of a sudden they're just exposed, and it can be misleading, because somebody could think like, oh, it's too much. Can we bring that back? And it's like, we don't need to bring it back.
It's a really important point though, because like it, almost always riding the send maybe off, like take a vocal line, take the send down to nothing at the beginning of the line and up for the very end. That's going to be the difference between an artist being like, that's too much reverb, or it's instantly going to change their perception of how does it feel. Like if it's just going the whole time, I mean, it's just probably not going to pass.
Right.
But then it creates that might work for longer reverbs. But you might still have to fill in the space. The beginning of the lines probably shouldn't be like completely bone dry, and then like this huge, massive long tail at the end. So you're going to have to blend it with like another shorter verb that's on all the time. That the two work together. But those long tails can be great, but you definitely can't get away with it, or not get away with it. It just doesn't work musically to have it going the whole time. It's just like the difference between it being usable and not usable. So you got to ride those sends.
So talk a little bit about that, about the balancing act for you. So I can see the situation where you're building a mix, and we often find ourselves trying to get to that. Okay, generally this is a pretty exciting static mix before we're automating. And so then a question is, do you lean towards things being drier and having less effects at that stage, and then in the automation you start to bring up the stuff that's needed? Because in other words, I think we can all experience this sometimes, where we're not sure if we're excited enough about what we're doing,
right,
until we either have like all that effect on it, or maybe having all the effect on it makes us not excited about it because we need the drier part or whatever. So how do you like to strike that balance between when you hit that static mix, and then when you start automating and getting the extra additional stuff?
I'm automating throughout if it needs to be there for the composition or the arrangement. But I do like to kind of like for drums, for example, I'll like to design all the closer mics that are hard hitting, punchy. But I want to know what kind of room mic options I have. So I'll go through all the different stereo mono rooms, or like distorted things, or whatever they have recorded, and sort of figure out, okay, in the ride section, this track feels cool. And in the hat section, this track feels good. And this part makes the snare sound good. But so I'll design those room mics to complement different section, and I'll do mutes on the regions so that they're coming in and out arranged in an exciting way. But then I'll pull them all down and move on to other parts of the song, and basically mix the song as dry as I can until everything's in. I do have a philosophy of trying to find the core elements of the song. So within each group of instruments, I'll arrange it from left to right, where the thing that like enters first and stays in the longest is on the left. So if there's like 6 acoustic guitars, but one of them is kind of the core acoustic guitar, that's on the left. Same thing for electrics and pianos, keyboards, synths, strings, anything. If it comes in early and it stays in longer, I want that to be in all the time as I'm building the mix. Mm-hmm. So I'll have the main bass, the main acoustic, the main electric, the main keyboard, the main string, the main vocal. I'll have those in when I'm getting my drum sound. But as far as like the more ambient things, or overdub stuff, I bring them in later so that I can have a clear understanding of, is this really helping the arrangement? And if it is, when is it helping the most? Because when I get used to the song with just the meat and the potatoes, the core elements, the main contributor of each type of instrument, it's so easy. When I bring in the overdubs, I can understand their what they're adding or taking away. Sometimes I have to, I rarely mute things, but if I do mute stuff, I'll let the artist know. But when I bring things in, I'm like, okay, I should kind of tuck this here, or this overdub's really incredible in this one spot. So, but the greatest producers are always kind of make that so easy for you because they just kind of they provide exactly what you need at the right time.
Right. In other words, it's sort of written into the
yeah.
arrangement and the production, so it's sort of obvious.
Yeah. So instead of like adding tons of snare reverb because you think that section needs something special, sometimes it's just in the overdubs that you don't have in yet.
Interesting.
But I think in general, I think getting a dryer mix together first is useful. Adding rooms and reverbs and delays and stuff is best done in context, I think, when you understand when everyone's in the room, so to speak. Right. I like doing that stuff in context. But when I'm just like building the mix, usually I keep it on the drier side.
Now, when you talk about the room mics, for some reason I pictured actually taking the room mics and editing them on separate tracks so that if you have sort of a treatment or a level for the verse and then the chorus comes in and it's bigger, do you ever do that where you split it and the track itself just plays and then you can just sort of raise the level of that room mic as opposed to writing in automation so that the level's going up and down between verses and choruses?
I'm always trying to find like the biggest percent change between the section because I think we're so inside of it. We think that these little changes are audible, but I think for people who don't have a Pro Tools session in front of them or aren't technical mixer type people, I think I'm always looking for like the biggest possible percent change. So I think what I try to do, I like your idea. I would probably do it between different mics instead of taking the same mic and manipulating it. I'd probably say like, oh, let's take this dark mono room in one section, then blow it up to a brighter stereo room later, but just track switch instead of changing the same track.
Right. So it's sort of like that lesson that we keep learning where it's like when you're recording the drums, yes, it's okay to have a ton of mics, but you shouldn't be thinking about those as all being used at the same time. It's more like these are different miking configurations for the drums so that you can create different perspectives of the whole drum kit at different sections of the song.
Yeah.
If you want.
Totally. And keeping in mind when you're recording, some songs are going to want some of those mics and some songs won't. And even within the same song, different sections are going to ask for different things. So it's just good to have them, but definitely I wouldn't use them all the time.
I've done it and it sounds like shit. It absolutely does. I mean, I think we all go through that. It's like we do the 15 mics on the drum kit and then you're trying to get it all work together and you end up with nothing.
It does help though. Part of my process is that auto align. Have you?
Oh yeah. Sound Radix. Is that the one?
Yeah. There's different companies that do different ones. That's just the one that I use. I'm sure other things work well too. But I almost always, that thing really helps.
And how do you use it? Tell us how it works. Well, yeah, I mean, you have to get granular, but just give us the
Sure. You put it across all your drum tracks with. This is the way I do it. Is I put it across all the drum tracks with no other plugins, and I use one constant source, like the left overhead, for example. My approach might be a little different than some. I think some people just say like the left overhead is the answer to everything, and then everything gets aligned up to that. But I take a little different.
Why left? Is that our hi-hat?
It could
be
drummer
perspective.
You could use the right one. Yeah, there's no reason to left. It was just, let's say, one of the overheads. It could be either one. Yeah. But I think a lot of people align to one overhead. I kind of look at it a little differently. I sort of treat things in pairs. So I'll align the two overheads to each other. And a lot of things do get lined up to the overhead, but like the snare, for example, is an obvious one. The toms as well. But like if there's two kick mics, for example, I'll line those two together and then line one of them up to the overheads. And that I feel like the same thing with snare mics, top and bottom snare, I'll line those two up together and then do the top to the overheads. Or what's
really the difference in the sound? What do you hear when you like the before and after of that process?
Well, with phase, it makes the most difference when there's the most common elements coming at different times. So between the two snare mics, they're going to have a lot of common elements to them. So lining the two of them up, you can get the most bottom if you get that bottom snare really lined up at the top. There's more low end in the drum. And the two kick mics have a lot of shared element, which is the kicks. So you're lining up those two and getting the best kick package that you can. The effect, to answer your question, is just a full bodied sound that is natural and not missing any like weird narrow notching holes of phase weirdness. But getting those kick and snare packages lined up to me gets a stronger kick and snare sound. But then I actually take the one kick mic to the overhead and one snare mic to the overhead, but then later I move the other kick to the lined up kick and the other snare to the lined up snare. But lining up the bottom snare mics to the overhead, there's not as much. It's just there's not as much bottom snare mic in the overhead as the top snare mic, and one of the two kick mics might be more in the overhead. So,
right.
I find that treating things in stereo pairs gets a good sound for me. And likewise, I don't move the rooms to the overhead because I like the rooms to be naturally delayed. I feel like that's part of what makes them sound like drums, and it gives that pre-delay of the distance of the mic. It's a delay, and it's a pre-delay of room, and it gives size for me.
Right. So
and
you don't want to change the room mics because you want to keep that sense of space.
Correct. And it also, there's less phase issues when the thing is just delayed. Like when the thing's right on top of it, there's more phase problems because if it's like very close but slightly off, that's when you start to hear the phase. But if the room mics are delayed anyway, they're not really going to be phasing with the overheads. There's a delay there. So.
Hey rock stars, are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble getting your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch or clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot closer to professional mixes. And it's my free introductory course called Mix Master Bundle. This course shows you how to get pro sound with your mixes from your home studio using free plugins and Pro Tools. And the best part is that these fundamental mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus, Studio One, Reaper, or whatever you're using. If you're ready to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com and get started now for free. And you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So one of the records in your playlist is the Gray Boy All-Stars. Great sounding, funky record. Is that an example of and those drums sound really have a great focus to them. Is that sort of a example of where you might have done that as part of the mixing process?
I think that kind of music is probably pretty dry. I don't know the song you're referring to, but I think with more like rhythmical music, I'd probably go a little drier. So there might not have been a lot of room mic on those. Well,
but I mean, as far as just the phase alignment of drums and stuff like that.
That was a project I did with Michael Andrews a long time ago. So I wasn't doing the auto line back then.
But this so apologies for that. I get mixed up on chronology, if that's the right word.
That's cool. No problem.
But some of the you've got some recent projects that you've been working on too since the last time we talked. I think you mentioned some stuff with Steven Wilson Jr. and Jeff Goldblum.
Yep.
Do you want to talk about some of the newer stuff you've been working on?
Yeah, other than that, it's really fun. I mean, these guys it's hard to go wrong. I mean, Steven is such like a brilliant lyricist and just such smart music, and his collaborator, Ben West, is just brilliant with all the music side of things. His band is amazing. Steven's, I love his songs. He's always, there's a very intense energy to him. And
it's kind of a raw rock and roll record in a way, right?
He just strikes me as someone who's like good communicating with his words and sort of not afraid to go for it. I mean, he's like, that saying, like, dance like nobody's watching,
Yeah.
Thing, like, there's a certain intensity to him that I really admire. I don't know what to say besides like every song he sends me is just moving. I just feel really emotional when I listen to his music, and he and Ben create amazing soundscapes.
Nice. Do you
even-
get up out of your chair since you're mixing in a studio where there might be nobody watching? How
Yes.
often do you get up out of your chair and dance around?
Often. Yeah, it's a good, even just standing up, you hear things differently. But yeah, there's probably some substandard dancing going on for sure.
Substandard dancing. Do you sometimes dance around in the room and just go like make up songs like I've got solar panels, stuff like that?
Not
That's
yet.
what I would do.
Not yet. I do dance around the room, but yeah. I think you mentioned Jeff Goldblum. Was that another one you mentioned?
Yeah. And of course, we talked about you working with him on the last episode too. And it's just such great music. And you did a wonderful job on those recordings. So, but I think you mentioned there was some new stuff as well.
Yeah, there's a new Christmas song out. He's, I mean, I can't say enough good things about Jeff. I probably talked about him on the last episode, but he's been studying piano since he's been little. He's very dedicated to his music, even though he's got another career that's very successful too as an actor. But I always love working with him. Another great example of a good band. But jazz is pretty different. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it ahead of time. So
yeah,
the capture is just a cutting situation. This for this Christmas song, we did it at a different studio. A smaller studio.
And was Jeff singing as well, or was he primarily playing piano with guest vocalists?
On this Christmas song, he's singing.
Cool.
So on his albums, typically he might sing one song, but his main thing is piano, and mostly it's guest vocalists.
Yeah, you had a lot. There were a lot of great singers on that record.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, totally. But yeah, he's his main thing's piano. So. And about half the songs are instrumental. So.
Yeah. And Rox, as a reminder, we have a playlist of Bryan's discography in the show notes. So make sure you scroll down, click on that, and go listen to all these records as well, because they sound really, really good. And it's a lot of fun to hear all the records we're talking about. So let me back up to Steven Wilson Jr. One of the songs started with kind of gosh, I don't remember what the title was, but it started with this awesome, like super wide single string guitar riff.
Yeah.
It's like acoustic in the middle, but it was very wide.
Cool.
Amp sound too. I wondered if, I don't know if you remember that specifically and want to talk about it, or if you just want to talk about some cool ways to take what might be a mono guitar sound and make it more of a big stereo image. If you've got that one part to start out a song, or even maybe that's a big part of the song.
Steven has this nylon guitar that's really a big part of his like musical identity. It's the musical component to his songs that matches his voice, and it's like that guitar is just so important to the song. So we have to spend a lot of time with that on the mix. It always comes to me with a mic and, like you noted, an amp. So he always runs his acoustic through an amp, and they get recorded separately.
And is that just a DI in the acoustic that's plugged into an amp, or is there some other tricky way to do that?
I am not sure how they do that. I don't know if they route a DI to the amp, or if they take I get a microphone and an amp. I don't think I get DIs from them. I'm pretty sure I don't. Pretty sure if they record that, they don't send it to me. They might be taking the mic and sending it to the amp, or maybe he has a pickup that they send to the amp.
Right. You mean like a sound hole pickup? I've got a coil pickup like that.
Yeah. I don't know what source they send to the amp. I can't answer that for you.
Yeah.
But I get the mic and the amp, and there's a lot of guitars. I mean, there's sometimes like 12 or 15 passes of his nylon that make up the nylon sound. Like when you, as a listener, you're hearing a nylon guitar, but that's often doubled, or it has octaves, or
that's cool,
or just like different inversions. You're just playing in a different position.
So that's interesting, because I led this by saying it's like a rock band kind of sound, and it's all nylon guitars.
But they're dirty. I mean, they're like pretty amped. It's almost like the nylon is the source, but we lean on the amp quite a bit, so it almost becomes an electric guitar feel.
Yeah, I know that stuff can be really tricky. Well, in the studio, it's not as tricky, but on a stage, it becomes a little trickier for how to do all that.
Yeah.
But you can really, that's a fun thing about the studio, is you can create things that, you can just create something you can create a huge sound of something that would typically feed back and stuff too.
Yeah. So yeah, the width that you're referring to is probably from a different performance or like a harmonized performance or
Okay.
but I do, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of, in general, panning ambiances because I like things kind of hard panned, but then having a little bit of the ambient version of it on the other side kind of helps me feel a little bit less lopsided. And to me, that provides a wide image. And a lot of times if like something's doubled, I'll put both of their opposites on the opposite sides instead of having their own ambiances on their same side, each one. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like if there's a left and a right, the right goes to the left reverb wise and the left goes to the right reverb wise. So
right. So you have the close mic signal on the left, but the reverb of it is on the right. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. That's what I mean. And that can help too when for like background vocals and for example, when there's like a low, medium, high, like there's different pitches.
Yeah, that's always tricky because I'm like, where do you put them?
Yeah, because sometimes you don't want all the low end or all the high end on one side. So having delays or reverbs that are panned opposite can help you kind of shade that a little bit. So you're not just leaning with just this one pitch on one side. It's just sort of like there's an ambient version of the pitch on the other side. So
okay, if you don't mind, let me interject some questions about that. So if we're using your mix method and it sends and global returns for the effects, how do we pull that up? Because when you talk about the sound on one side and the reverb on the other, my brain tends to think, oh, we're just creating a dedicated reverb for that sound and panning it over to the other side. But are you using like a stereo plate return kind of thing, and then the send is panned to one side to the other side, so it shows up that way?
Yep. Yeah, I don't touch the returns. The returns just stay put. Everything happens on the send. So the send is stereo, and the send, you just pan the send.
Okay.
And then that way you can use the same reverbs and delays on different elements.
Okay, that's cool.
It's just, when you go to make stems, you just have to do it one pass at a time. Like you have to mute. Everything's post fader, so when you mute something, only the thing that's not muted goes there. So, but I just leave my returns alone and do everything on the send, the pan send or the send.
Okay. I'll say it back to you just for the rock stars. You might still be trying to visualize it.
Sure.
The return of the reverb. Let's say we're just using a plate reverb, even if it's a plug-in plate. That is a stereo return, and the send is stereo too. So if you pan a low vocal to the left, but pan the send to the plate to the right, then when you listen to the return of the reverb, it probably still sounds stereo, but it sounds mostly like the low vocal is on the right in the reverb. Does that make sense?
It does, but I would just take it a step further and say you got to know your gear, because some plugins have a mono input and some plugins have a stereo input. And that could even be like, in the Pro Tools menu, there's like a multi-mono page, and then there's like a stereo page. So you need to experiment with your equipment and your plugins and understand and know what they are. Sometimes, like on the BX20 UAD, there's like a little switch on the plugin to link or unlink the input. So, and then sometimes there is no such thing as a stereo input. And so my template has a lot of multi-mono instances. So if there's a reverb or a delay where you want to, like, I'm a big fan of not having it, I want to have it really come out hard on the other side. So I don't want to blend the input at all, like 0%. So if the plugin can't allow me to do that, I'm going to put just two mono things and put two mono plugins and then just group them. So it's basically a stereo return, but it's just two mono things. And then you have a mono input, and then you pan the send, and you just know that it's only going to one of them.
Okay, that's great. So to reiterate what you just said, my description was kind of wrong, and you aren't looking for something where it's kind of vaguely on the right. It's like really on the right. Cool. Awesome.
Yep. I think
awesome. That's cool.
That's a big part of what makes me happy about mixing.
Well, I think about old school records too. And I felt like you'd hear that a lot on some old school records, where like an old jazz record where like the drums are on one side of the picture, but you hear an effect on the right, or sax is over here, but the effect is panned across.
Although back then that might be like the bleed, right? Like
it might have been the bleed,
the drum bleed in the piano or something.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What else should we say about effects? Do you have more you want to say about typical vocal effects that are ready to go? I mean, you talked about, you've got these long ones, and then you've also got maybe a collection of short things that might be in there all the time or something.
Yeah. I can tell you about effects I typically use, but it's all very song specific. I mentioned the Ocean Way. I like those like random halls on the 480 for piano stuff. Chamber wise, maybe Capital Chambers or that Seventh Heaven has some good chambers in there. Let's see. Like that BX20 I mentioned is great. Sometimes you want like a really weird affected sounding reverb, like a boingy spring. Like the BX20 is kind of like what I consider like a beautiful sounding spring. But sometimes you want like a character spring, which would be more like PSP. I use the PSP one a lot. I forget what it's called, Springbox or something like that.
PSP makes some cool stuff.
Yeah. The RE that Roland Space Echo has a good reverb only mode too. If you just get rid of the delays on the Space Echo, there's a cool reverb in there too.
Is that a UAD one or something?
Yeah, but I'm sure any Space Echo model probably has the verb only, because that's something the hardware did too.
Yeah, it has spring and a delay.
But yeah, I think I just lean on different things. Like for strings, a lot of times I use like an altiverb, different halls in the altiverb. Let's see.
Let me ask about that, because, and so we're talking about IR reverbs, impulse response reverbs. The altiverb was our OG impulse response reverb, right? And now there's a whole variety of them. And I've always been on the fence about them, about when they're most useful. Do you find that some sounds are great for IR reverbs, and then some sounds, like if you try and use it, you're just going to not like it, like it's better to use something else?
Yeah, I feel like rooms typically have resonances to them. So sometimes if you're sending to a room sound, it might not even sound like reverb or feel like reverb. It might not be very effective in the track if it's just sort of making it like boxy or sort of like low MIDI, or it's just sort of like making certain notes sort of ring out, because some rooms just kind of don't really feel like reverb. So I think you just have to trust your gut with that stuff.
Well, for example, I feel like I've tried impulse response reverbs on drums and then maybe not been so sure whether I liked it or not.
I'm not a big drum reverb person. I never really get it to work. I think it's because I like a lot of low end in my snare drum, and when all that low end goes to the reverb, it just kind of sounds like a mess. I get the most success with drum reverbs to take room mics and make them roomier.
Okay.
Sometimes like a non-lin kind of non-linear verb can work really well. But I like to really like make the tail cut off really short. You maybe print it and chop it off, or maybe like automate a fader or automate a mute or something to make it really distinctively sharp. Sometimes with like a pre-delay. Sometimes the non-lin has to happen on the upbeats, like on the ands, on the eighths. Just generally just like having a long tail and a drum reverb, I just never really jived with that too well. I've heard people do it well, but I think like for the reasons I mentioned, like maybe the low end in the snare drum just doesn't sing well in verbs. I don't know why, but I get more success with mangling like crazy room mics, and that gives me like a drum ambience that I prefer. Like I said, or sending the room mics to be roomier. Sometimes that works well.
Yeah, sometimes I like doing a big, huge, long reverb. If it's like a reggae style track, and you've got like some kind of snare hit at the beginning of a song or something.
Right.
And then sometimes I find myself perplexed. It's like, do I just crank up the send to the usual reverb in that moment, or do I have to create a special one just for that one snare, or stuff like that?
Yeah, I usually just have a bunch of different options that are there, like short, medium, longs that are around, and just try
Yeah.
sending to them differently. But yeah, drum reverb and I aren't really friends. But I love
Nice.
reverb. I love reverb on other things. I mean, obviously, a lot of people would say my mixes are a little reverb heavy.
Wasn't that a song in Oklahoma? The drummer and the reverb should be friends.
I don't know. I'm not up on my Oklahoma trivia.
Attention, all rock stars! iZotope has got you covered. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and Vocal Synth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, iZotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and Vocal Synth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments, from subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design. iZotope takes your music and podcasts to the next level. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any plugin purchase. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. Or the OWC Thunderbay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, and a dedicated display port, plus an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now. My guest is Bryan Cook, joining us from Los Angeles. Bryan, are you ready to jam?
Jam it.
Let's jam it, man. I forgot to say we're back now for the jam session.
Okay.
We were joking around about wearing Birkenstocks and jamming and mixing with solar power and
juice cleanse
and juice cleanses. And that was because you talked about you used the expression like juicing your mix or something.
Right.
So
right.
So off mic. And now I'm revealing it to everybody. What
reveal away.
Let's keep talking about mixing. So what does that mean? What is juicing your mix? What does that make you think of?
You mean, what do I do when I want to hype something?
There you go. Yes, that's exactly what I meant to say.
Well, a lot of times with the mix bus, I don't do a lot on there. Sometimes compression works for more like rock songs, but some songs, they kind of want to be more open. I don't do a lot on the bus. Sometimes I like some tape plugins, like the Oxide from the UAD is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that like the UAD 670 Fairchild I like. One of my friends has this plugin coming out called the hit button. It's just like a 1-button thing that's just sort of, it's just kind of like, there's a lot going on under the hood. He's going to someday maybe release like an adjustable version, but it's like one of these like 1-button plugins that just sort of
cool.
I don't know what it does yet. I don't think he's revealing it yet, but to me, it's just sort of like adds a little bit of nice top end, maybe some sort of a little wider, maybe. But I don't do that stuff while I'm mixing. I feel like that shouldn't be part of it until it's like you need like a little dash of yellow at the end of your painting to just really like pop,
right?
Or like when you're cooking, just like that like last little squeeze of lemon or something, But
nice.
it's just sort of that if you do that stuff too early, then like the ingredients aren't really settled. Um, my stereo bus is pretty minimal usually. If I needed to make it really loud, sometimes I use K clip and like that stealth limiter. I think it's by T-Rex.
What's K-Clip? Is that's part of the T-Rex stuff as well?
No, K-Clip is made by someone else. I forget who, but it's just a clipper. There's a million different clippers out there, but the idea is just to do a little less limiting. With a little bit of
clipping just sort of chops off transients without changing the actual dynamics of the, or without whereas limiting is very quickly turning levels up and down of the whole mix to adjust for peaks, right?
Yes, and
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, they're all distortion compromises, and I don't really want to lean into that too much, unless like if I'm getting a mix that's just like 12 stereo tracks, tons of effects baked in, and the objective is to be super like the producer's mix or the reference mix. Mm-hmm. If the objective is to stay super close to it, and that's loud, I got to be loud. Maybe I'll start with a lot of stuff on my bus and then just work into it. But in general, I leave the bus pretty open. But yeah, there are tools like if you need to get like hyped, like that OTT is like a multi-band compressor thing.
Doesn't that come from Ableton Live or something like that?
I think so. I think you're right. I don't use Ableton, but I think you're right about that. But then there's other juice, like the only other, like there's like drum juice. I have a parallel compression and a parallel distortion setup for drums that sometimes gets used, sometimes not. Sometimes I only use it in the choruses. It's an effective way to like ride the drums without riding them.
Yeah.
Distortion could be like that devil lock that you mentioned earlier. Compression stuff, I like that. There's one of the what's that old there's a compressor that's like the Levy Breaks compressor. I forget what it's like black with like rainbow colored knobs.
It's not the Pi or something, is it?
No, it's Compex.
Oh yeah, Compex, right.
Yeah, Compex. There's a Compex plugin that I like a lot for the parallel compression. That Shep's Omni channel has a really great vibe for that too.
The Compex one, is that one of those Boz Digital versions?
Yes. Yep. Those things, the drum juice, as we're talking about juice, the drum juice for me would be like distortion or compression. And in my mind, sometimes I save that for the louder parts of the song. Sometimes it just seems to be sounds ridiculous in like a sparse verse. But then other times I put it on the choruses and I rewind, and then it's kind of sounds amazing in the verse. Then I'm like, okay, now what do I do? Because I was hoping to have that be my like chorus juice, but now it kind of I like love it and I want to stay in the whole song. So,
and that's all part of the drum processing, right? Like whether you're thinking about a drum folder or whatever, as opposed to the actual stereo bus. And I feel like that's a lesson that, still takes me a while to learn, because one of the first places you go when you're mixing is you're like, oh, wow, we put this excitement on the stereo bus and it makes everything sound more exciting. But there can be a tendency to want to push that to get the drums exciting, and then all of a sudden you're backed into a corner for the rest of the music and you get to the vocal and you're like, what the hell do I do now?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you want to change your low end. It's best to go to those low end elements instead of trying to pour low end into things that don't have it,
So is that a good way for us to think about, assembling our mixes, is think about instruments in groups and sections and make sure that they sound great on their own before they even get blended together for the stereo bus?
That's how that would be a way that summarize. That's how I look at it. But I know some people are very successful at like what's called top-down mixing, where they kind of like the stereo bus is kind of a huge contributor. And they kind of do that first. But I've always been like a channels up kind of person. But to answer your question,
I like that. Are you channels up or top down?
Right.
Sounds a little lewd.
But the drum distortion and drum compression is all, for me, it's on sends. It's on pre-fader sends, not post-fader sends. So I'm designing what drum mics go to those parallels. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I'll take the squashed room mics out. I won't send the squashed room mics to the parallels and squash them again. or maybe I want the parallels to be just like the punchier close mics. So I might not even maybe take the overheads out. Maybe having on pre-fader sends, I could also lower the level of the overheads going to the parallels. So
right.
But then once you do that, it's just the parallels become like another drum track. So you have to group them and ride them together.
Well, it reminds me, I mean, back in the day, we might have, tracks and then we run it out, the kick and the snare separately and go over to the Sans amp and print it back in. And, you find some cool sound and mix it in. It's like, oh my God, that sounds amazing,
Yeah.
And sometimes I just forget to do that. I need to be more conscientious about including the distortion elements as part of my drum creation because it's really an important part. And, when I got a hold of Decapitator, for example, that can be really fun to like slap on your drum mix, but kind of like other things you're talking about, putting something across everything isn't always the answer because you get pushed into a corner. Whereas, treating drums and then bringing it as a new element in and out of the drum mix could be the way to go.
Yeah. When you add distortion to drums, sometimes you uncover these like grace notes that you never heard. But the drummer, like Aaron Sterling comes to mind, he heard the song once and he understood where all the vocal holes were or what the vocalist was saying. And there's like a tiny little grace note in there that is in the perfect spot in a break that needs something. He knew that hole needed to be filled, but until you have that distortion in there, sometimes you don't even hear that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's like little life, just a lot of little energy to bring out.
You need to go back to the juicer for just a sec. Yeah. Just kidding. Sorry, just being goofy as always. But like distortion on drum mics, it's a really remarkable thing to discover. And granted, everybody probably discovers it now because everybody's got plugins and distortions and all kinds of crazy things. But I feel like initially in the studio, it was like a light bulb moment where you run something out and you hear it for the first time. You're like, oh my gosh, one snare mic distorted and compressed like crazy can sound like a full drum kit sometimes, and you're like, wow, I didn't know all the rest of the drums were in that one mic, So it's really fun to experiment with.
Exactly. And don't be afraid if that is a cool sound. It might be the drum sound in like one little part of the song.
Yeah.
Like if you stumble upon this amazing thing, don't always just like hide it and pull it down so it's barely audible. Maybe that is the whole drum sound for like the intro, the outro, the middle, or whatever. Like a little 4-bar turnaround before the second verse. It could be anything. But those are creative decisions that, depending on who you're working with, they may or may not be. I don't know. You just have to understand your client or your collaborators, or maybe just prep them, give them a heads up, or maybe print the mix 2 ways. Say like, "Hey, I had an idea here, but here's the way you had it," kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had guests on the show. F. Reed Shippen said, if you're not getting fired, you're not trying hard enough, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've also discovered those times where I make a bold move.
Yeah.
And probably more often than not, if I make a bold move, especially if I put auto-tune on a folk record maxed out, that usually gets shot down.
Right.
But, some bold moves like the crazy dub delay on something can make an artist come back and go, oh, I loved that,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And, I think that's something that's really important to do is to talk to the artist before you work with them and say, hey, if something comes to me, I'm going to try it, but I want you to know that if you hear something and it's not working for you in any way, just let me know and it's going to be gone in a second.
Yeah.
I mean, because some people are afraid to say something, or they're sort of timid about hurting someone's feelings. But if the first time you talk to someone ever, you say like, hey, look, no ego here. I'm going to try stuff. If it doesn't work for you, don't be shy. Just let me know. And I'll more than happily mute it because we need this to be right for you.
Yeah. A good way for us to think about it from our own part of that dialogue too, is to remember that we can make this move over here. We can try idea A. And if they don't like it, now we're going to go try idea B. We can still throw our ego into B. We can put as much ego as we want into every idea. even if we don't use the first, second, or third one and end up doing something totally different. So,
or what about the ego of just being a person that listens to an artist and allows them to get what they want? Like maybe no one's ever done that for them before.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something marketable there. Like you're someone who actually pays attention to what they're asking for and respects them enough to do what they ask without like rolling your eyes or having any sort of, I mean, you can learn to love what they love too. It's not like there's no like preciousness here, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That is part of the whole engineering experience where you start out and you've got a taste in music and there's styles of music you just never really liked. And then you start working on them and you realize you're like, oh, there's a whole like world of craft in this particular style of music that I can completely get with and learn how to appreciate and learn how to create these new kinds of sounds. And it's what you just said. It's part of that. It's like you said, you can learn how to like what they like. Just cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of I think one of the main jobs of being a mixer is getting inside the head of the people that you're working with, because you're being brought in late in the game and you have to kind of like figure out where they've been all this time, like emotionally, you know, when they wrote the song, when they're producing the song, maybe the song took a weird left turn and became something else, but they have memories locked up in here and you have to like kind of figure out like, how is this going to be the best version for them? And I think that's incredibly, you know, it's just one of the biggest things we can do.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great reminder that when we're mixing, we're late to the party.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But you gotta start dancing like nobody's watching pretty quickly.
And you exist to do something that they can't do without you, or maybe they do it, but not as well. And I mean, plenty of my clients go on to start mixing for themselves later. I mean, it's just sort of like they're just not good mixers yet, but they become amazing mixers. And then they and I don't work together anymore because they're mixing for themselves. But whenever someone's hiring you, it's because you're helping them do something that they can't do, or you're better at it, or you have more experience at it, or you're more consistent at it, or whatever the reason they feel like your taste level matches up with them. It's a real honor, you know, it's something that you have to respect where they were going with it. And I mean, there are moments where you can sort of throw out wild ideas, and if it's a supportive atmosphere, everyone's open to hear it, and then you just figure it out if it's good or not.
Yeah. And also I think once you start working with somebody, you start to get an understanding. You develop this dialogue for what are the elements that are going to be right for this project. And then you just sort of know.
Yeah. Sometimes people are like, I really don't like tuning. I really don't like reverb. I really don't like this or that. I don't like quiet vocals. I mean, people have all kinds of preferences, and you just sort of settle into it. You're like, okay, well, this person is that kind of person. Some people don't like, I don't know, distortion or something. I mean, it's just not their thing.
Have you ever sent a joke mix to somebody?
I've wanted to. I don't think I've done that with a straight face. No.
Awesome.
Hey, I one thing that you mentioned I wanted to tell the rock stars is that if you're sending like stuff out to a pedal or trying some parallel distortion stuff, you always got to make sure to be checking and seeing how that's really adding up, because I almost feel like sometimes you get lucky with the phase and it actually gets thicker, but if you add that stuff in and it gets smaller or thinner, it just might require just like a little phase flip. So
well, then also isn't there a difference
stuff all the time?
Is there a difference between what you're hearing while you're recording the pedal versus what you hear when you press play and play it back? Or
depending on your
delay compensation usually handle it at the recording stage too?
There's usually a difference between the round trip times, depending on how you have what converters you have and how you have them set up, and delay compensation on or off. For sure. You usually don't hear the real picture till you hear it recorded.
When do you have delay compensation off in Pro Tools?
I don't, as a mixer. No, I do that. But I read somewhere recently that sometimes if you have a track and record, the delay compensation is not on, but you can force it on, like with like some kind of key command that turns the number blue or something like that. I forget. I don't know the details to that, but I'm at mixing. I always have it on.
Every studio needs a good vintage mic for that classic warm sound. Whether you're looking for those airy highs, sweet mid-range, or silky low end, a good vintage mic can put the magic in your mixes. So it's no wonder vintage mics have been loved and praised by thousands of engineers for decades. The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia using only the best electronic components and feature the patented Golden Drop capsule design for great detail and richness of tone that will bring that classic vintage vibe to your studio and be a real workhorse for your sessions. This time, our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer just for you, rock stars. Use the coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the Vintage Series mics V67, V47, or V12, the mic you're hearing right now. Plus, they'll throw in a free shock mount worth $120 for a limited time at jzmic.com. A&amp Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your A&amp Audio monitors to fit your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the A&amp Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adampaudio.com. Yeah, I have HDX as well in my studio, and I love it, particularly because every time I go and work on any system that uses native, core audio for the sound driver, and all of a sudden I'm dealing with latency. I'm like, what the hell? How does anybody make a record with latency in the headphones?
Yeah.
It's just like I like the, and it's been a long time since we're just all analog and latency never even existed.
Right.
You used to send something to something else and you just knew exactly what it was going to sound like right in that moment.
Yep.
So I want to go back and reinforce a point you said about the distortion on the drums. And you made this great point, which is don't just make that cool sound and then do the automatic move, which I don't know if we all do it, but I've certainly done it a million times, which is you then take the fader and you turn it all the way down until it's just blended. So you're like, it's not fucking up my drums right now, but it's down low enough so I can say that I used it. And it's like, and then that's a recipe for like, a really bad soup or something.
Yeah.
And I think that a good move maybe is just to immediately take that sound, go, that's killer, and then just hit the mute button and just all of a sudden wait and see if you can just drop it in loud and proud in some part of the song. So I think that's kind of what you were saying, right?
Yep. Definitely.
Okay, cool. So let me ask you again about the stereo bus.
Huh?
Our stereo bus, which has some processing on it, probably has some needles, some LED displays there for compression and things like that and gain reduction. How often do we want to see those needles moving around much versus not really moving hardly at all?
I'd say the stereo bus is more of a place for less needle movage. My needles are going crazy, but not on my stereo bus.
Okay.
That's the way I do it. Some people are very aggressive with the stereo bus and they're good at it and it works for them and that's cool. But getting back to that thing we talked about earlier, I'm not a big stereo bus leaner kind of person. I don't lean on my stereo bus too much. If I have to go super loud to match like where the reference mix was, I would like to send mastering maybe like a little bit less loud version. because I don't know, I look at stereo bus even in mixing as sort of like more like a mastering approach where it's just sort of like not a lot's going on there for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really mix into it. I don't like the feeling of like having a limit to where I can go on the stereo bus. My stereo bus is typically just to sort of get in the same universe as what the client is used to in terms of loudness.
Right. So
But
there's a limiter there that brings up the overall level and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, but I try to use it as little as I can. Um, I
What
do
about
also
the
playlists.
EQ? I mean, you talked about the hit button and things like that.
Yeah,
Um, should we be at least exploring, ideas like, hey, what happens if you put a Pultec across your
yeah,
your
yeah,
your stereo bus and boost some lows and highs, give it a little
totally,
smiley face EQ.
totally. Me personally, I'm always looking for more mid range in my mix because I always are a little too smileyed out.
Okay.
But so I'm always looking for more mids, but you know yourself the best. But no, for sure, I think it's very common to add top end to a mix, especially if you've been working on it for a while, your ears are tired. Sometimes you could sound dull, but but it's maybe not. Maybe your ears are just tired. But I think an important thing is to playlist on your print track. On my print track, I playlist the client's references and other songs on the album that I've mixed, and I'm flipping around. Just I monitor my print track so that when I'm changing playlists, I can go in and out of input, and I'm hearing my other mixes on the album, or if they liked whatever, Christina Aguilera or whoever the artist likes. I get that audio and I put it on my print track and I playlist it. And then
Okay.
I'm trying to see like what world are they used to operating in and where their ears tuned to. Sometimes I've done a mix that I really love and it just needs a little bit top compared to what they're used to, or depending on what, or maybe needs more top based on like the producer's reference mix. And then at that point, if you start adding top to your stereo bus, just keep an ear on all the elements tracking together. So like when you're adding top to your stereo bus, are your drums and your vocals both getting brighter at the same time? You know, the same amount?
Right. Right.
Because sometimes you pour a lot of top on your stereo bus, and then either the vocals too bright or the drums are too bright. So you might have to get back into the channels to sort of like. But if you've done a good job, hopefully everything just tracks together, and you can just adjust the stereo bus.
So I'm going to say that back to you, Rockstars. I think Brian's describing you've got your mix set up. It's going to a mix bus track, an aux track that might have the mix processing on it, and then that track is routing over to a print audio track that is just, imagine it like a 2-track tape machine that just records the mix and maybe doesn't have anything else on it except for metering as far as plugins.
Right.
And then and then when you playlist that track, you can put these other reference mixes on there so that if you flip between playlists, you're well, let me back up. So if you go in and out of input on that print track, you're either hearing the mix you're doing right now or you're hearing it play back the particular reference you want to compare to.
Yep.
And what's cool about doing it that way, as opposed to, I also use a really cool reference AB. I use it's called Reference. Actually, it's from Mastering the Mix, and it's a plugin that will let you compare mixes, and that can be really cool too. But the way you're describing it, what's cool about that is when you do the input, you always have that input quick key available in Pro Tools, no matter where you are in the session. So you could be deep into an EQ plugin on the bass track, and without having to go back to the master fader to go hunt for it, you can just hit a quick key and go in and out of input, especially for comparing like the last version of the mix to the newest version.
Right.
So that was a long explanation, but it's one of the features of that I remember learning from Craig Alvin when he was on the show, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. You can, because it is one of the struggles of mixing and being in Pro Tools is having to click too many things to get to a place to try something, and it's nice when you can work really quickly. Do you use controllers and anything on your desk that allow you to sort of more quickly access parts of your mix?
I don't. I have a single fader port. That's the only controller I have, and I use that for for rides, they're a little bit more free flowing and just a little bit more nebulous. Like if a particularly like strings, for example, or pads, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes it's really great to just be not tied to anything and just sort of be like kind of flowing around a little bit loose, like not have anything to do with tempo or anything, you know? Uh,
Yeah,
so faders are cool for that, but I don't ever feel the need to have more than one fader. I'm good with just the one.
that's the PreSonus
Yeah,
fader pack, right? Yeah,
yeah,
old
yeah,
school. And
yep.
if I recall, that one's pretty cool. Like it, I think whichever track you select, if that's the focus, the track that's in focus and Pro Tools, that's automatically the one that's on the fader pack too. So you just grab the fader and now you're on the track that you're looking at on the screen, which can be helpful.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
Talk a little bit more about that, about writing drums and vocals and stuff in a mix. When and how do you like to do those things, and why?
I usually ride drums and vocals at the very end. I try to get the mix static as well as I can. Sometimes that involves like, clip gaining things so that the plugins are seeing similar levels and reacting healthily. Healthily? Is that a word? I don't
I
know.
like it. I'll go with it.
Um,
It's like funnily when you talk to your British friends and they're
um,
saying something's
I
funny.
haven't heard
Funnily
funnily.
enough.
Oh, got it. Yeah. So yeah, vocal rides and drum rides usually happen a little bit later for me. Um, One thing I would say about rides is that I used to look at vocal rides as like digging out all the quiet words so that every single word was perfectly heard. And
Hmm.
um, that is still true and it's still a thing. But I think you have to be a little bit careful about that because sometimes that can just flatten things out really unnaturally. Because
Hmm.
sometimes the artist meant for those words to be kind of quiet. Of course, he or she wants them heard and like intelligible, but sometimes it's not such a bad thing to let their delivery live on, you know? Um, but if you're digging out some of their quiet words so they're heard, don't forget to do the same with like when they really hit something hard because they're emphatic about it and they're excited. Like sometimes when they really sing something loudly, maybe your compressors killed that and you got to do like a post fader ride after your compression, and just
Right.
restore that for them on their behalf because you don't want to just you can't like flatten it out too much because that's something I've been working on over the last, I don't know, couple of years, 5-10 years or something. Just allowing the performance to sort of, not make. I'm repeating myself at this point. You know what I
So,
just said. Um, Drum rides.
well, hey, we
I
can stand vocals for just one sec.
Okay.
I think it's
Okay.
okay to
Cool.
repeat that. I think you're onto something really, really important,
Okay. Cool.
which
Cool.
is that pursuit of, and I made notes about this too. So I'll, if you don't mind, let's talk about it a little more. So
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
when you record a vocal, if you're not doing much compression at the recording stage, I think one of the hard things to learn about and discover is just initially like how crazy dynamic a vocal can be. A vocal can be
Yeah.
really, really dynamic, more really kind of like more dynamic than drums sometimes,
Sure.
because a vocal may want to sit in a mix like a distorted guitar where it's just like right in your face and never moves. But the actual vocal that came out of the voice into the mic is like all over the place and level. There's teeny quiet parts, there's loud notes, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, I think you're referring to how might go about learning how to process the shit out of that to like flatten out the vocal because we're really trying to get it to sound like, amazing pop record A. And then later we realize we've kind of removed the expression from the vocal and need to reintroduce it into a mix. Am I sort of
Yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
you a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned radical recording levels, and that's particularly true with less experienced singers who don't really understand how to deliver in the studio versus live. And
Yeah.
I'm not a singer. I don't really understand the dynamics of singing, where it comes from in your body as well as singers do. But as a recordist, I mean, I've seen some inexperienced singers and I've had to gain up some of their words and lines like 20, 30 dB sometimes. And then all this crazy noise comes up and they're like, why is it so noisy? And it's like, well, the source wasn't really there, you know?
Right.
Like what came out of their mouth was overly dynamic for a pop context, this dense track. But 20 or 30 dB is like, it's a lot, you know?
Yeah.
But I think what I'm talking about is a little bit more like when everything is relatively the same level, it's sort of like paying attention to how they're singing it, because some words are just meant to be soft, you know. I mean, some lines are just have to be screaming, you know. And I think you can't take that away from them, because it's just not going to feel right to them.
Yeah.
And to me as a listener, I get a lot more emotion out of it too, just to sort of just keep in mind, like, it's okay for the volume of the vocal to be moving around a little bit. As long as like you're hearing everything, it's really natural and really human for it to be ebbing and flowing a little bit.
Yeah.
So even like maybe the compression for me is less volume leveling, and compression for me is like tone shaping with the bite, you know, like the attack time, the release time to me is like shaping the envelope of the vocal, like the bite, and then like the spitty breath come up and all that stuff, like how the sustain comes up. I mean, it's just that to me is like the envelope of the sound. But then we have to get back to, now, what did they mean by what they were saying? And like, let some words be quiet. Let the emphatic, crazy energy parts be loud. Like, let them hit it. Like sometimes they just land on a downbeat super loud, and it's going to be really musically unsatisfying if that doesn't happen, because everything's relative. I mean, your brain is set up for this quiet part right before the downbeat, and then if it comes up, you're gonna that's a relative move, and if it just stays flat, you're like, it's kind of like a wah, like just kind of like didn't really happen for you, you know?
Yeah, interesting. Howdy, rock stars. Do you ever feel like you're spending all this time watching YouTube videos, trying out mixing tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes, but it's just like not getting you anywhere? Have you ever wished that you could have more of a simple and straightforward process for creating a pro mix that wouldn't take you years to learn? Look, what if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could actually coach you through them? If these are any of the questions that you're struggling with, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover this proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of the students. Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. It was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. That's from David P. Look, if you already understand the basics of mixing, but you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and check it out. In fact, I'm so confident that you're going to love this, that if you can't get a great sounding mix within 30 days, just send me an email and I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So go ahead and take your mixes to the next level like you know you want to at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. Well, and the thing is, too, like listening through your discography, voices are so different. Each singer is so different and unique.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
you know, it's a big part of why the vocals are so important in a song, is because that's what we pay attention to. You've mixed Bono's voice. One Republic was one of the notes I took, where that vocal is like very processed and just sits just right in a very dense production, you know. Right. And then you've got Ruthie Foster, which is maybe talk a little bit about that. That's a great sounding soul record, very beautiful full voice. And, you know, part of my question around that is you've got also things like delays and slaps and reverbs. And, you know, how do you approach all these different, I don't know if you're recording all the different singers on these or focusing on the mix. Okay.
Yeah, I just mix.
But I mean, do you feel like you definitely have a sense of what the recorded vocal is like as it's delivered to you too?
Right,
So
right.
maybe talk a little bit about that, like when it's appropriate to process a lot of the recorded stage of the vocal versus saving that for the mix, and whether you think these delays and echoes on a Ruthie Foster record, for example, existed. Would she have been hearing that in her headphones while she sang?
I don't think so. I think on a record like Ruthie, they probably just had like a nice reverb set up for her. Um, I think in general, if tracking engineers and producers have the singer hearing a lot of effects while they sing, a lot of times they'll print it for me as a separate track that's 100% wet. But in the case of Ruthie, I think she was just hearing like a little bit of reverb, and that's about it. Unless there was a song that asked for a slap. But I mean, my approaches to the slaps and stuff, and even delays, are usually like, I think a dry slap or a dry delay sometimes doesn't really sit in the mix very well. Like you kind of have to turn it down to the point where you can't hear it, and then it's just sort of hiding a little bit. And I get more satisfaction if the delays and the slaps are like more heard but not so dry, if that makes any sense. Like or not so bright, like a bright dry delay kind of just like floats right on top. And a lot of times I'll darken the delays or darken the slaps, so it's just kind of like it's not all that sibilant stuff that's like asking for your attention. Or like
body part.
Yeah, or like even like if you think about like a delay into a verb, it's still a delay, really. It's just like it's just a diffused, smeary delay that's not so dry, So if you think about a delay, a reverb that has pre-delay, it's essentially putting a delay before the verb, and so you're really listening to a delay. It's just in the form of a reverb. Am I clear?
Yeah, totally. And actually, that just reminded me of, I think Imperial Delay was another Boz delay plugin, one of the first ones I got, which actually has a smear button on it. So you can kind of smear the return of the delay. And, EQ is such a powerful tool for delays and effects. You can really, it's amazing how you can take something that's not working and just EQ it. And it's like, oh, now it works.
Yeah. I mean, take the bottom out, take the top out, maybe make it really mid-rangey. But like a lot of times the slaps for me are just really like pre-delayed short rooms, and it could be like a really short room. It could just be like almost nothing, no decay time to it, but it just kind of like makes the slap more friendly, where I can like live with it without it making calling too much. I don't know. It just sits behind the vocal better for me.
What are some favorite very short rooms that we might want to explore when we're mixing? We have some plugins that are
I mentioned earlier, like that Ocean Way UAD that I use for guitar, or maybe the room drums, that I like sending vocals to that too, but with a pre-delay, a special pre-delay for the vocal only. So the vocal has its own different pre-delay, not just like adjusting the pre-delay on the room, but having like a pre-delay channel, like an aux for the vocal pre-delay. So I can have the vocal have its own special pre-delay. But that's what makes it a slap for me. But I think there's a good other short rooms. I mean,
are they usually just a room preset in a plugin, or like should we shorten plates a lot, or should we shorten chambers like crazy? Or
I usually use rooms. Like the IR, like the Altiverb has like Chad Blake was talking about the calls living room, and I was like, oh, I love Chad. Let's try it, and it's great. It's just kind of like a regular random room. And but I don't think what room it is matters too much. It's more just like it's got to be super short and make it as dark or as bright as you want it to be.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't fixate too much on like what room it is.
That's fine. But I mean, I remember discovering really short ambient spaces and all of a sudden going like, oh wow, this is like a whole world of depth in a song that's like much closer. It's like I'm in a small space right now, figuring out where to place instruments as opposed to everything. Yeah, I think when you just start with all these long reverbs, and you're like, how do I use this stuff? And then it's like, why does everything sound like reverb?
Oh my God, I know. You got to have it all. You got to have some dry, you got to have some wet. but yeah, these like little short spaces for like tambourines or like percussive guitars or something.
Yeah.
It can just let it sit, and it settles a little easier, and like suddenly finding the right volume is easier when it's not so like in the front. And it it allows other things to be front, like the vocal or
Yeah.
whatever you want to be in the front. It's nice to have an option that's like, not far and not front, so a little middle.
It's just a good reminder that you can take a bunch of dry elements in a mix and find a way to create lots of space around it without using any long reverbs. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I know this, this may be going back a little bit, but the Inara George record
Yeah.
had a lot of that quality to it
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah.
like, there's a lot of depth and space, but everything's like right up in my face at the same time.
Yeah, lots of dry stuff on that for sure.
Yeah. You were starting to talk about riding drums, and I wonder if you wanted to continue on.
Yeah,
on
sure.
That idea.
Yeah.
When do you bust out your single fader and make moves?
Drum rides to me are not the single fader vibe, because what I do is I don't group the kick in there. So I usually have the bass drums as like loud as they possibly can be, and there's somewhat of an anchor with the song.
Okay.
So a lot of times I ride drums without the kick, which means a group. That's probably everything, like the drums plus the parallel compression, parallel distortion, but just minus the kick. Or you could just keep your drum group. Sometimes I just ride it and then I just delete the line, the kick line. Yeah, drum rides are an incredible way to sort of get that best of both worlds thing, where when there's space for them, it usually fills. But it could be you ride choruses up, that works. But if you ride the drums and the chorus, you probably have to ride the bass too. Those two usually are a package deal, kind of.
So if you're not using a fader for that, then this is a little bit more like drawing in, a box level boost or something like that, or are you still grabbing a fader on the screen and using automation mode?
I'm drawing it in with like a group on the edit window, like using the lines, like moving the lines instead of faders. Usually I want to understand exactly how much it's being ridden.
Mm-hmm.
Something like drums, it's like you kind of have to find that sweet spot where it doesn't feel super ridden, but it just injects this little shot of energy.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like if I'm going to ride a whole section, it might be like 1 or 2 dB, but fills might be even, I could get away with a little bit more rides, like maybe 3 dB on a fill.
And so, yeah, let's talk about that, because that's again, I remember discovering that at a certain point. And then a question is like, which elements of the fill? Do we just grab everything but the kick and ride those fills? Is it sometimes just the close mics? It is just start with everything, and then if that's broken, figure it out.
I usually don't ride the kicks. I usually ride everything except the kicks.
Yeah.
But I will say something that's super important that I picked up on a couple years ago was to not just to try to ride across the downbeat. Like, don't let the downbeat be some like letdown. Like, don't ride your fill and then get back to normal for the downbeat, because it's like, yes, the fill's exciting, but then the next section kind of sucks. I mean, you got to find
you get that crash. The crash gets the boost too.
Yeah, or taper down. Like, let the ride exist up until the downbeat, and then start riding down after the downbeat. But you got to find a way to musically get in and out of that. Sometimes it means adding crash samples. If like the tonality of the kit changes with the overhead rides, you don't want to really ride the overheads differently than the rest of the drums. Sometimes the sound just gets funky. So if you really need more crash cymbal, sometimes samples are a good solution to that.
If you're riding across the downbeat, I think of that downbeat as being the kick and the crash going into the next part.
Right.
Do you find that we're back to normal by the very next snare hit, or do you find that sometimes you gotta go across a bar before you're back to normal?
Yeah, either one can work. Just, yes, you're right. Both of those are options. And I think sometimes if you go past the first snare, sometimes the snare starts to feel inconsistent. Like the first snare of the chorus was louder than the second one. So that can be weird. So usually I get out by the first snare, but who knows, whatever.
Can we skip this part of the process if we're just lazy as a mixer?
Yes, you can. Just turn the drums up all the way. All the time.
There you go. That's so frustrating. That I think that's fair to talk about. Those frustrating moments when you're mixing, where you put all this effort into this minutia, and then you get to the end and you realize you just needed to turn everything up.
Totally.
And that's all it needed.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that takes a lot of experiences to be like, I've spent all this time on this thing, and sometimes it just needs the simplest thing. Like maybe your bass is just way too quiet. You're like, why does this not work? And sometimes you just forgot about it because you were focusing on something else. So,
here's another thing that's not exactly drum related, but they've got some funky drums in it. Again, the Gray Boy All Stars.
Yeah.
What Happened to Television's great album. There's a song in there called V-Neck Sweater.
Okay.
And it's got these really cool vocal sounds that sound like they're reamped or something. And I wondered if that was one of those bold mix decisions for you, or if you even remembered that detail, or whether those vocals just showed up sounding like they were sung through.
No, that's actually an album that I recorded. So,
cool.
I would have done
nice work.
Thank you. I would have to hear that. That was a long time ago. Sounds fun. It sounds, just by your description, it sounds like maybe we ran the vocals through a guitar amp or something.
Yeah, I captured it that way. Maybe.
I could listen to the track real quick if you wanted to.
There's some hollers and stuff like that in the where it's just like it's a little bit of amp distortion. If that was a long time ago too, then it's a fair question. Maybe it was before we all just had 5 million amp plugins.
I'll check it out real quick.
All right, we'll check it out in the background there.
Yeah,
I love it.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. That's totally some sweet guitar amp reamping kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We probably put the amp like in an isolated space, like a booth or somewhere else, so that
and you probably had a mixing console in the studio, so it was easy to reroute stuff and send it out to an amp real quick.
Just like off a send or take a mult,
Yeah.
And then we might have put like a DI box or something, or a reamp box before. You know how the impedance is different coming off.
Yeah.
But when I use pedals, it depends on what it is. Like if it's a verby kind of a weird effect, I don't really bother with the reamp stuff. But if you're reamping for like a really good sound, like maybe you recorded a bass DI and you want to actually get a full great sounding bass amp on a reamp, I would definitely use one of the reamp boxes for that.
Yeah, I've done that stuff on records and enjoyed it, but I'm really getting blown away with some of the plug-in reamps now for bass, particularly. I've been using.
Oh man, me too.
Ampeg now has like the SVT and a B15 plug-in. I think I got them over at Plug-in Alliance, and man, they just sound killer. Like that's much better tip. Than if I tried to record that in the studio.
Totally. Well, I use the SVT from UAD, but
okay, they have one too. Great.
Yeah, but I want to check out the Plug Alliance.
I wonder if it's the same. I wonder if it's all made by the same folks anyway.
Oh yeah, sometimes they just port it over.
Yeah, they just do it on different platforms.
Right.
But I don't do that in the same way for guitars. For some reason, I still like. I mean, I do love some direct guitars when the timing's right, but generally speaking, the guitar through the amp is the way to go.
Right.
And I find that like I've started tracking with just the bass player, just doing a really great DI sound, and I'm actually more inclined to use a plugin. And it's probably partly because I only have one ISO room, and if the bass and the guitar are in there, they're going to be bleeding, which can be cool, but not always. And I don't know. It's just interesting the directions we go with all this stuff, and whether it's what the reasoning is.
The bass reamping in the mix is something that makes some sense to me, but I've never understood the people that send you direct guitars and be like, "Hey, can you reamp this for me?" Because it seems like a guitar amp is such like it's just like such a part of what is that sound,
Yeah, it's like, hey, can you pick a new singer for this track? And
it's like I'll give you a DI vocal or something,
Doesn't Adobe make the new singer plugin now already?
Reamping guitars at the mix seems like a humongous change for me, you know. But I'm not too hip on all the guitar reamp plugins, but I have that soft tube thing that is pretty cool. It has like a Fender,
Amplitude or
something
whatever
like
the name
that.
is.
Yeah, it's got like a Fender and a Vox and a Marshall, and the heavy stuff always sounds terrible to me, like the really high gain
Right.
reamp plugins,
Right.
like Sizzle Fest. But sometimes the little deluxe combos or the AC30 combo can
Yeah,
work.
I've started messing around with the 11 plugin a little bit more, but I like a real guitar through a real amp a lot,
Yeah,
and I want to hear it
yeah,
right away.
yeah,
Yeah, I think part of the answer is don't save something for later if it could have been done now, you know.
yeah.
And then but then there are situations in the studio where saving it for later, it's like later it will be easier to find the right thing. And sometimes with bass, I think that's a little bit part of it is like because you don't quite know what the combined low end is initially until you start putting it all together in a mix.
Or maybe just there just wasn't a booth for the bass amp when they were
Yeah,
tracking, you know.
yeah.
But
And then there's the phase issue between a DI and an amp too, and which one
right,
you're going to use and all that.
right. I was going to say something. I forget what I was going to say. Oh,
It's
you know
all right.
what? I remember now. You know, if a client does send you a DI guitar, I also think we shouldn't be like, I don't know. I mean, there's a reason why they sent it to you, probably because they were just in a rush or maybe they didn't have what they needed. But I think we should also look at it as an opportunity to like help them out. And I wouldn't say save the day. That might be a little dramatic. It's not
Right.
exactly saving the day to reamp the guitar for them, but even though I don't like reamping guitars for clients because I think it's a huge change, if they ask me to, I'm going to do my best to try and make it happen.
So you're saying you don't go straight to Instagram and post a photo of the reamp track
Yeah.
on there with a laughing face emoji and go
Nope.
like, "Who sends a reamp
Nope.
guitar?"
No.
That's not the right move.
No. That would be incorrect. That is not
That'd be
correct.
incorrect.
Yeah.
All right. Nice one. This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Well, I do know that that guitar DIs have been described to me as sometimes being useful because you can edit. If you're going to tighten up guitar parts, it can be easier to move those around than amp ones. But, you know, I think the easiest one of all is for somebody to play the note in the right location already.
You and your standards, Liz.
Me and my dang standards. But I mean, you know, there's so many different ways to make records. You know, you can, you can track with bass and guitar, take DIs with drums. And then if you need to, if it's helpful for the style of music, go in and beat detective drums or edit, and then also scoot around basses and guitars to get everything much tighter. And that can be the right move for a production, you know, because everything's different. And that could be a good example of when you wanted to have those DIs, I guess.
Yeah.
You did talk about using the Memory Man. I think you said that was one of the actual pedals that you like to mix with. Did I hear you correctly? And if that's the case, what are some lessons you've learned about sending it out to pedals and bringing it back in? I know you talked a little bit about it already.
The Memory Man, I only like it because it's sort of has a kind of a dark, kind of dirty kind of sound to it that sits well for me behind other things that are not dark and not dirty.
Even though we've got Memory Man plugins.
Yeah, I don't think I've played with them too much. Because I have this one. So I just
Yeah.
use
If it
but
ain't broke, don't fix it.
I find the short single repeat is great. Obviously Memory Man's really in my brain famous for how it feeds back.
Mhm.
So something about how distortion and dark things feed back differently than like clean, bright things. So I think that's something that would be cool for people to know that don't already know that. A lot of people understand that already, but feedback has a different feel depending on, is it clean and bright or is it dark and dirty? Like for the dark, dirty stuff feeds back a little bit more wildly and a little bit more easily. And there's just like more sustain to the feedback. Um, and it's just a different feel when the source is different. Am I following?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But you also have to get it out of the computer to a pedal and back into the computer again.
Yeah. I just connect it line level and don't worry about it. I just bring down the send until it's not clipping the pedal.
Are
and
you
then I
are you
turn up
having
the
to go
gain
from
on.
XLR to quarter inch or any
Yeah.
kind of crazy
Yeah.
stuff?
No, yeah, just XLR to quarter inch. I don't remember if it's TRS or not.
Because your HDX with, you said, a Apogee interface, so that probably comes out on a fancy patch based style connector or something like that.
Yeah, it's a DB25, and I have breakouts to XLRs.
Okay,
so yeah,
cool.
then I have an XLR to a quarter inch, but it's a TS, so it's not like a balanced quarter inch. So
Yeah.
they probably just drop a pin on the cable.
But it's a good reminder. I mean, there are cool ass boxes we can get to interface with our pedals,
Yeah.
but we don't have to do that. I mean, I remember for ages we didn't have any of that stuff, so we would just take the output of the Mix Plus, 888 24s or whatever, and just knock it down to a quarter inch cable. You just have to bring the level way down as you go in and out of the pedal. And then, of course, we didn't have automatic delay compensation back then either, so we'd then have to like scoot it back in time and try and line it back up to the original track and see what it sounded like.
Right. Yeah, sometimes you have to bring the level up after you record it too. But as long as it's not crazy noisy and as long as the distortion is the intended kind of distortion, not accidental distortion.
Right on. Well, we are coming to the conclusion of our round 2 podcast.
All right.
And this has been awesome hanging out with you. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention, or shall I go to my closing question?
Yeah.
Any other new projects you were real excited about or anything like that?
Yeah, the one of those things I sent was talking about this Paper Castle project with Troy Wellstad. That's pretty cool stuff. But yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, that Josh Catalan, producer for the Kazi J project, Josh Catalan is involved in all kinds of cool stuff. It's just a really fresh take on music. But his whole crew is great.
Yeah, that was some great sounding stuff. I'm so sure if I've had some questions about that too.
For Kazi?
Yeah, I don't know if I did write down something specific, but
that's cool.
Remember, great voice.
Yeah. Just the way Josh Catalan, the producer, hears music, I find just inspiring and just sort of just like a little different take on it. And there's like a certain originality that kind of sticks in my mind when I think about this year. Like many people stick out, but some people there's a certain originality that's really inspiring.
Do your mixes sound better when the energy is coming from your solar panel versus coming from the electric grid?
I don't think so.
Do you sometimes appreciate that you are getting to do a wider palette of sonic records because you're focused on mixing, where people are delivering you things that are recorded in different ways in different places?
Yeah, it's super helpful. There's like a lot of music being made, and there's a lot of people that are just sort of a little bit unsure of how to finish it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that just need someone that's going to be like an ally and a helpful listener. And I think that's just the biggest thing I can leave with, is just listen to your client and just be on their side and be patient. And sometimes things take longer than you expect, sometimes not, but it's all totally fine. You're going to walk away happy and it's all going to be good.
So if you are wanting to get more into mixing and start doing a lot of projects as a mixer, the first lesson is learn how to be a good listener and just listen to the client, because the methods and techniques for finding a solution for each record are things you'll just figure out.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And listen to a lot of music, be familiar with the references they're going to talk about, just understand what's going on in the world. And
don't be afraid to ask for some references.
Yeah, totally. And the experience will come, and with time, you just keep figuring out where your rates land and what keeps you busy, and adjust as needed.
So it's okay to screw up our rates at first.
Make it work.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
You do have to keep the power on, but maybe if you get some solar panels, then that'll help cover it.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Well, let me go to our closing question here. This is one you answered before, but we'll take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time and find young Bryan practicing his saxophone. You got to put down the saxophone. Oh, no, wait. You got to put down the ducky if you want to play the saxophone. That was the Sesame Street song. And you say, listen, I've come back to tell you this one thing. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself. What advice do you feel like going back and giving yourself today?
I think it's just really important to exercise your friendships. How do I put this? Believe that like every experience is a helpful one in some way.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be meeting people all the time. It may or may not seem at the time like what that person's value is in your life, but everyone has a lot of potential value, and there is no like predicting what makes sense or doesn't make sense. I think you just have to believe that everyone has a good place in your life and a lot of value, and you can always learn something from them.
Yeah,
one way or another.
That sounds like good advice. That sounds like advice the whole world could take these days. Well, I agree. And it doesn't mean that those moments can't be very frustrating before you know what the value was.
Yeah.
But it is really motivating to just have an attitude that says, you know what, I'm going to get something positive out of this because I'm deciding to.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Right on, dude. Well, thank you so much for hanging with us on the show again. It's great to chat with you. Really appreciate taking your time out to share so much with us on the podcast. Where would you like the rock stars to go, learn more about you, check out your music? What if they're ready to hire you for their next hit record?
Probably best place is Instagram, which is at Bryan Cook Mix. That's Bryan with a Y. That's probably the best place. Another good spot is a website, which is bryancookmixer.com.
Cool. Right on. And of course, you can go see pictures of the solar panels there, rock stars.
It's so funny.
That's what I did.
Yeah, man.
Awesome, man. Well, rock stars, thank you for listening. Bryan, thank you so much, man. It's a pleasure. And I don't think we got a chance to meet in person, did we, when we were at NAMM or something like that? Did we?
Yeah, NAMM a long time ago.
Long time ago. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we had a breakfast one time.
Oh, that's right. That's where we met, was the breakfast.
Yeah.
That's funny because I was just thinking about John Paterno, who was there as well.
Oh, nice, man. I love John. I assisted him a bunch. He learned a lot from him. Right on. Well, thank you again, man. And I look forward to seeing you in person next time. Yeah, see you soon. All right, man. Cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.
Hey, rock stars, I want to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Jay-Z Microphones, Atom Audio, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and Sampley. Plus, remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. At jzmic.com, use the code ROCKSTAR for 40% off the V47, V67, or V12 microphones. Plus, get a free shock mount worth $120. And at Sampley.app, use the coupon code RSR20 for 20% off. And at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off. If you enjoy Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things that I use in my own studio, and I highly recommend them for your studio as well. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I want to also thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.